Think about it, salt. Like salt has a sell-by date or an expiry date. It's crystallized. Salt doesn't go bad. That's why we eat the salt. Basically, there's a bunch of guys that are like, what if we put dates on these products so that the retailers have to pull them off so that we can keep selling them more products? Literally, it's an arbitrary, basically fake date. What I learned is the average store throws out like $5,000 or $10,000 worth of food every day. And that food's usually 3 days to sometimes weeks before the sell-by date. People don't realize we have over 1,500 stores. To get my store associates to move this water bottle from here to over there is like tens of thousands of people that have to understand that we're doing something different. We have a first mover advantage, but you could be seduced by that. It's not typically the first mover that wins a market. MySpace didn't win, Facebook won. To be first and to be the best are two really different things. If it's not us who pulls this off, like who will do it? Like we got to do it as a team.
Welcome to the Generation Hustle Podcast, a show that explores the world of business, entrepreneurship, and culture, all centered around the millennial. I'm your co-host Sherrison, alongside my good friend Amin, and this week we're tackling two giant issues: food waste and food inequality. Consider this: grocery stores on average throw out $10,000 of food every single day. This stat is terrifying on its own, but it actually explains why, if you considered international food waste as a country, it would be the third leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions behind the USA and China. This is where our guest this week is trying to change the world. Episode 38 is with Josh Domingues, the founder and CEO of Flashfood. Flashfood is a mobile platform that connects surplus food from grocery partners directly to its users at reduced prices to alleviate food waste. Imagine you're craving chicken for dinner tonight, and you get a message from your local grocery store telling you that chicken breasts would actually be 50% off today since they're expiring later this week. As a consumer, you've just saved time, money, and waste from going to a landfill. Today, Flashfood is well on its way to becoming a household name across North America, with massive partnerships with Loblaws, Farm Boy, and Meijer. So we chat with Josh about the journey behind the business. He explains the economic and environmental impacts of food waste, the challenges of food inequality, and how he built Flashfood to where it is today. This was an eye-opening conversation that really exposes many secrets of the food industry and the processes involved. If you're looking to save money on your next grocery bill, click play and consider downloading Flashfood. Super excited to have you here today, and we're looking forward to this conversation. Marie introduced us, obviously, and we were excited to talk about Flashfood and kind of get your story and understand everything that you're doing in that space. But we wanted to kind of start off from like a kind of a general standpoint with kind of the topics that you're addressing with your company, obviously with food waste. And that's kind of where we wanted to start it. So thanks again for being on today. Yeah, let's talk about food waste. Can you talk about kind of the problem, how you came across it, and like how it kind of resonated with you?
Yeah, sure. So I was like 26 or 27 when I read this stat. Maybe 26. So the story is, my sister was a chef. She called me after a catering event and she's like, I just threw out $4,000 worth of food. I started laughing. I'm like, you idiot, why would you do that? She's like, no, this feeling sucks. I feel horrible. So I calmed her down, and for the next few days I started reading about food waste, and I came across a National Geographic article, March 2016, and it was this like massive article about food waste. And so I'm reading this, and what happens when food gets thrown out most times is it ends up in a landfill, gets covered by other garbage, and when it rots, it doesn't have oxygen, and that produces methane gas. So the statistic is, if international food waste were a country, it'd be the third leading cause of greenhouse gas emission behind the US and China. Which, like, when I read this stat, I was in my condo by myself, and I'm like looking around, I'm like, how is this the first time I'm hearing this? Like, I'm 26, I'm educated, like, what the hell? Like, you always hear about don't throw out food and like finish your meal because other people would like want to have it. And I'm like, yeah, I get all that, but like that didn't really change my way of living. Which is just the truth. But when I read that stat, I'm like, man, it's not cars and factories and all this other stuff. It's like food. And there's so many people that need food that don't have it, even in our communities. That was really it for me. And then when you think about just food waste across the chain, it's like the value chain, it's insane. Like there's, through COVID, it was highlighted. You mentioned it, but the food standards are so high in North America that oftentimes farmers won't even pick up food off of the ground to put it in like on their tractors and stuff, because by the time that food gets to the grocery store, if it gets, and I'll speak to like grocery, if it's not aesthetically good looking enough, it'll get rejected and it'll go back to the farmer, and the farmer will incur the cost of that. And then also what the farmer does is just dumps it at their field. So just on a global basis, it's not that we don't have enough food for everyone. It's that we're wasting too much food. And then you also think about what that dynamic is just for people, right? Like when we waste all this food for aesthetic reasons, then it means that big food companies are producing more. And like, listen, I love like processed food. Like I eat a bag of chips. Like if I say a week, like that's a lie, like more than once a week, I think. And then you start to see like what food is more affordable and how that looks for like people in different socioeconomic situations and people that live in different communities across North America, across the world, and like what people are able to afford. And I mean, when you're in a low income neighborhood and all that you have is like a corner store, you're eating like Twinkies and stuff and KD. And so it's just food waste is this huge, massive, complex issue. And particularly with fresh food, it only has so long until you can eat it. So like early on in my journey, and I know we'll get into it, but I talked to an executive at a grocery store and I'm like, why don't you just donate all this stuff? And they're like, look, we do donate a bunch, and we've donated a ton of fresh food.
Right.
And then what happens is we pay for it to get to these food banks or pantries, and we show up a week later and it's just sitting on their shelves rotting because they haven't even got the food out in time. And then we're just paying for this food to rot somewhere else. So like we can't justify getting all like we can't do it as a business. And so it's like shit, like this problem of food waste at the farm level, at the transportation level, at the store level, at the restaurant level, like even well before it gets to our plate and we're like, yo, I'm not going to eat that. Like it's just a way bigger problem in so many other parts of the value chain.
And is it like, obviously there's a lot of factors to it, and maybe I might be oversimplifying it here, but what is it with the system that like is preventing that, right? Is it the transportation? Is it the cost associated with that? Is it kind of keeping the food fresh still between all these movements, things like that? Like what is it that's holding us back from making that something that's profitable or even break even, right?
It's a combination of a whole bunch of factors. Logistics is certainly a big one, but look, like when the three of us go grocery shopping, we're always reaching at the back for whatever has the longest shelf life.
Right.
So all the near dated stuff moves to the front and we don't pick it up. So grocers have to pull it in advance of the sell by date because nobody's going to buy it anyway.
Right.
And then also just the way that the consumerism is, when we go to the grocery store and we want to buy a watermelon and there's only one on the shelf, we assume it's the worst one, so we don't take it. So they have to overstock the shelf so we get selection.
Right.
And it's just like, it's a combination of consumerism, it's a combination of logistics, it's a combination of like fresh food, food safety. Like, it's a really difficult, like you're going to have food waste. There's never going to be a day where there's like no food waste. And, but we can get a lot better around these things. And I think, I mean, look, like I said, like I have a university degree. I was 26 when I read that article, and like you guys, it seemed to be the first time you heard the statistic on how big of an environmental issue. Like it's like, why don't we all know that, right? Like, it's crazy. So it's a complex problem.
Yeah. Do you feel like brands also have a part in this in terms of, you said shelf life is important, so obviously to kind of fuel sales and stuff, you got to move things off the shelf and got to get stuff back on. So do you think from a psychological standpoint, we're kind of ingrained into society to kind of have that aspect?
Yes.
Of,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So this is the other piece that like, as I was uncovering some of this stuff, and I won't get the story exact, but it's pretty close. Like sell by dates, best by dates at the grocery store, like, there's only 4 categories in the store that they're actually like health and safety hazards. And it's baby formula, nutritional stuff, and like 2 others that we wouldn't think of that I should know off the top of my head.
Right.
But basically where like labels and dates got added was something like 40 or 50 years ago. There were a couple of like executives. I think they were at a CPG company and they were talking about yogurt. This happened in the UK. And I believe it was the UK. And again, I should know this story better. But basically, there's a bunch of guys that are like, hey, this tastes a little weird, doesn't it? And they like went around the room and they're like, yeah, this tastes weird. And they're like, what if we put dates on these products so that the retailers have to pull them off so that we can keep selling them more products? And it's like, literally, it's an arbitrary, basically fake date on these products. Like, dude, think about it. Salt. Like, salt has a sell by date or an expiry date.
Yeah.
It's crystallized. Like, salt doesn't go bad. Like, that's why we eat the salt. Like,
Yeah.
some of
What
these
about
products
water?
have-
Like water bottles. Like maybe there's something to do with the plastic. I have no idea, but
Yeah.
water does not expire.
I'm using a reusable plastic bottle
Yeah.
right now. You know, like
Yeah.
it's crazy to think about some of this stuff. Like a brick of I don't know, like a brick of cheese. Like cheese isn't cheese like molded? Like
Yeah,
or a-
it'll last for a very, very long time.
so as I was uncovering all this stuff, I'm like, this is just so messed up. Like, and brands are starting to get around to it. Countries are starting to put in place like food waste reduction, like goals and targets because people realize how big of a problem it is. But I just think like it was one of those problems that just got away from us and people didn't realize it.
Yeah, that's scary how they can just create an arbitrary system just to be like, oh yeah, you just got to move it this way. Because we've seen so much kind of clips and videos come out now, whether it's on Instagram or YouTube or whatever it is, and it's people like trying to debunk this, being like, yeah, it's Best Buy, whatever, but you can eat this bread for like another week or something, or you can keep these eggs for another week, and it's like, why are we so conditioned to believe it has to be aesthetically perfect or it needs to meet this made up system or made up kind of ranking?
And there's businesses now in America, and we did this a little while, but they're massive startups that are like basically ugly fruit and vegetable delivery companies that like they source all this stuff from the farmers that otherwise wouldn't have gotten picked up, and they put it in a pretty cool brand. It's called Imperfect Foods or Hungry Harvest. They put them in a box and they ship directly to consumers for like huge savings. So there's now like markets around this type of food and just like food in general. There's a lot of re-education going on.
Yeah,
in the world around this.
I was gonna say I've seen that at like Loblaws now, where they have like a mini shelf where they have, I guess, past date food or whatever, and then it's like 50% off or something like that in terms of its regular pricing, but it's like this little narrow corner where nobody really sees.
Which like, and we'll get into like what my business is, but that was basically the impetus of the business. Like these discount racks in the grocery store, I would joke that they're like in the back corner. There's no light. It's like the flickering light in the corner. There's a moat around it with like alligators. Like it's like basically impossible to even find this thing in the store. So like we'll get into it, but our business basically took the discount food rack, made it look sexy, and put it on your cell phone. Like that's what we did.
Right. So before we kind of get into that, can you speak to kind of what consumers can do in the meantime, like the ones that were trying to kind of find that balance between food waste and get, I guess, aesthetically perfect food? You know what I mean? Like, what can we do to kind of balance those needs to kind of counteract everything that's going on?
So the biggest way that you can reduce food waste is at home. Like that's where the most amount of food waste happens. And it's just making sure that like you eat all the food that you buy, or maybe you change your shopping habits around buying less bulk and just eating what you get. That is like the single biggest source of food waste and the most impactful area that each of us can make a difference on. And it's like, how do you make a business around that? How do you like communicate that to enough people? It's difficult to, but that's what we can do. And then as it relates to like buying habits, I think it's just buying less bulk and like buying for what you need in the foreseeable future instead of buying food that you're not going to eat.
So Costco's taking a hit, eh?
Yeah. Depending on how many people you have in your household. Like my wife and I, we don't have any kids, and when we go to Costco and we buy vegetables, it's like, oh my gosh, like we better be ready to eat our greens. But if we go to her parents' place, like usually there's a bunch of people there, and it's like Costco's a savior. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I guess it all depends on like the consumer's buying habits or eating habits in this case. So flash foods. So can you kind of talk about the problem that you guys are addressing and, how the idea actually came about?
So back to that story about my sister who told me about food waste. I read about it. And at the time I lived on top of a grocery store in my condo building. And I thought two things. How much food do they throw out every day? And what's the lead time from the time they throw it out till the sell by date? And what I learned is the average store throws out like $5,000 or $10,000 worth of food every day. And that food's usually 3 days to sometimes weeks before the sell by date. And I don't mean I mean the grocery store in the middle of Liberty Village is throwing out boneless, skinless chicken breasts 2 or 3 days before the sell by date. Like
right.
That's like the impact of this. So the idea that I had was if there's a way for the store to mark the price of the food down, send me notification. I could see it through my phone, pay through my phone, and pick it up in the store the same day. People would shop like that all the time. And that's what we built. We took the discount food rack, made it look sexy, put it on your cell phone.
Digitize it and make it much more easier for consumers to actually use, right?
And
it doesn't have to be...
and allow people to like see what's available. Like we're actually now dictating what people are going to have for dinner based on what's available through the app. And like our top customers are saving tens of thousands of dollars a year on their groceries because the average discount's 50% off.
Right.
Like,
and
we're seeing
are you guys
like
partnering up with
go ahead.
consumers and businesses?
So we partner with the grocers, and the grocers like put the flash food coolers in their store by the customer service desk. And then we both collectively market to some of their shoppers and other shoppers in the area. So it is like a consumer facing app, but we have deep partnerships with our grocery partners.
In terms of like, you've already touched upon this a little bit in terms of grocery stores and why they haven't, say, chose to implement this. Can you kind of talk to us about that?
Yeah, sure. So why have stores chosen not to do this?
I feel like you're trying to watch your words here.
It's funny. So like there's a side story. I am trying to watch my words a little bit, but there was like an investor that I talked to really early on, and they're like, why haven't you moved faster in Canadian grocery? And I'm like, well, like Canadian grocery is like white, male dominated, big, like expletive complex. And the person stopped me, the investor stopped me. They're like, don't ever say that to me because you'll never say that in front of these investors or these executives. So don't ever say that here. Like basically our meeting's done. So I left and I'm like, would I ever say this in front of these executives? Like, that's why I think we're not moving fast. So like, that's the answer to the question, which is also like why I installed when you asked. So sure enough, fast forward, like, I don't know, it must have been 6 months after that. It's me, one of my advisors who's now a board member, and two executives at like one of the biggest grocery companies in the world, really. And they're like, why haven't you moved faster in Canadian grocery? And I'm like, and these were like early days. I'm like, well, like male dominated, like white, big expletive complex. And both of them just like blew up laughing. They're like, yeah, okay. Like, yeah, I get it. Like, yeah, it's very herd mentality in the grocery industry, and it's very like copycat. So took us a while. We had to get things really right, and we had to execute. Also, we're making a market, and what we're doing now is much different than we were doing 5 years ago, right? Like 5 years ago, it was like basically, hey, we've got this idea. Can we try it? And both Longo's and Farm Boy, Jeff York at Farm Boy was the guy who like really put this in place and gave me an opportunity. And we built off of the back of that and created a really simple model that really worked in grocery. But think about walking into a grocery store, how big those stores are, how much is happening, how many people are at those stores. I talked to one executive who I had access to through one of the programs that we did. And I'm like, man, why don't you just, because we had a good enough relationship by then, why don't you just put this in your store? And he's like, you don't realize, like people don't realize, we have over 1,500 stores. To get like my store associates to move this water bottle from here to over there is like tens of thousands of people that have to understand that we're doing something different. Like it's very, very complex to make any changes in a retailer. So I think the learning around that for me was really important, and the copycat mentality of the industry, which is just like kind of like all retail. But we were given a shot from a few people, and it allowed us to build something that would really work at scale. And then we signed a deal with Loblaws and had an opportunity to pilot with Loblaws, who took a risk on us, and then signed a deal with them. And now we're countrywide in Canada with all of Loblaws as banners. And they've been an incredible partner. And then we're scaling rapidly now in America because, again, like we got to the point where it's like that, the herd mentality, the network effect of like snowball rolling down a hill type thing. But it was really bleak if we would get there or not. And we needed to be really sharp, clear, and simple in order to get to that point.
Yeah. I really like that point where you kind of talked about the change in mentality of like retailers. Like, say, for example, like my Walmart changes up the layout. I go in there and I'm just like, what the hell just happened here? Like, right? I remember electronics used to be there. Like, well, what's going on? It's like, you know, when they introduced grocery, I was just like, okay, this is like brand new. Like, what's going on here? So I totally understand when they're saying like consumers will have a very hard time understanding what's going on because they don't like change.
That's so funny because I was actually even thinking about it from like the store associate's perspective. Like, imagine you having that reaction, and imagine being somebody who worked at that store for a decade. Be like, what the hell just happened in this store?
Yeah,
right.
It's funny as you were mentioning that, I was laughing. Like, as a consumer, I'd probably walk in and be like, "This is too much. I gotta go home. I'll come back. I gotta process this." It's difficult in retail because you have so many different things happening.
Yeah, they have like tens of thousands of SKUs, and it's difficult. Like you're introducing a brand new concept that hasn't been, one, shared with consumers, two, it's new to the business itself. So is it something that they can monetize off of, indirectly, directly? And so there's a lot of factors. And in terms of Flashfood itself, where do you guys kind of see yourself being, like as a market player? And then also, like, what's the future goal for Flashfood?
Yeah. So all the things that you just said are bang on. We're making a market in an industry that's not innovative, that hasn't been like, we grocery shop the same way that our parents did when they were kids, right? Like there hasn't been much innovation in grocery. Where we're going, we're now at a point where we were talking to one of the biggest grocers in the world the other day, and as we went through the pitch and like are talking to the right people, they're like, "Why aren't we doing this with you yet? Like, what's happened?" So the way that people are looking at us is different because we're far along enough now that we've got all the answers for a lot of the different questions that come in, and that takes time. Like you need to be in, you need to take your reps, like you have to learn, and you can't just you can fake it till you make it to one degree, but in retail grocery and what we're doing, like you have to understand the business and be airtight. And then you have to become the best at what you're doing in a market that you're just creating. So it's funny because before I answer your question, it's like we have a first mover advantage, but there's also like you can be seduced by that. It's not typically the first mover that wins a market, right? Like MySpace didn't win, Facebook won. Like there's so many different examples of that. You look at electric cars, basically like every major auto company was building an electric car and they gave up in '07, '08. And then Tesla really pushed through and like now look what's happening. So to be first and to be the best are two really different things. And for us, as we continue to scale, so we're, like I said, countrywide in Canada, coast to coast, scaling pretty meaningfully in the US. So I think we're in 8 states now and just rapidly adding more states and more partners. And the thing that we haven't talked about, to me, why I started it was really the environmental impact. But if you think about what this is doing to families who are saving 50% of their groceries, like our top shopper is a young mother or one of our top shoppers. And a story that I often tell is a young mother with 3 kids. Her husband had got laid off because of COVID. And she wrote into us. She's like, if it wasn't for Flashfood, I couldn't feed my kids healthy, affordable food. Right. So where our mission is, and like our mission is to reduce food waste and feed people more affordably. And where I see us going is we want to be solving this problem in every country in the world, really, because this is a problem that happens everywhere. But in the immediate future, we really want to continue to execute on the US and win the market while we're even creating the market and being the best at it. So it's funny because you want to move fast and you want to scale quickly, but you also want to do it the right way and not make mistakes. And yeah.
And I think I actually really, really love that because, like, you know, in America, there's a lot of infrastructure issues around, you know, I'm not going to try to isolate a community, but like the African American community, there's not a lot of investment in infrastructure. So a lot of, say, food, grocery stores or whatever, large ones that are well known are not investing in those communities. And they don't, like you mentioned, they have to go to this corner store to get like processed foods and stuff like that. So, you know, I like hopefully you see a future where you guys are working with, officials and stuff to bring a connection and help these individuals in need out.
Yeah. And that's like, as we get the scale and keep building this business, there's a whole bunch of optimization pieces that we can put in play to solve some of these other problems that we're talking about. And that's exactly where we want to get to, right? It's like, get the scale with the grocers, execute, you're making them more money, you're hitting a bunch of metrics for them. You've built a standalone business. Now, how can we start to solve some of these things like food deserts and food inequality, which are like,
that's the word I was looking for.
Very difficult problems, too, right? Like very complex, difficult problems. But I talk about this with our team frequently now because my job is like communicating with the team and like reiterating the message. if it's not us who pulls this off, like who will do it? Like it's like we got to do it as a team. So it's really exciting to be in this space, and yeah, to solve some of the things that you just talked about, because you think about the long-term effects of like a child not being able to eat even like somewhat healthy, what that does to their attention span in school, what that does for like opportunities as they grow up. Like it basically pulls you out of, and you're probably already like starting way behind in life in a lot of these situations. And by not being able to eat like any sort of healthy food, it's almost impossible for you to even like make it. Who knows? But like, just makes things a lot more difficult for people.
Right.
So
I think that's incredible. We were looking at it from the lens of food waste and kind of environmental policies. Obviously, that's an incredible story that you mentioned with the single mother as well. So it's like you're solving very, very complex problems with this. And one of the things that you mentioned there was to be the best and to be the first are very different things. And I like that because we wanted to understand kind of the driving factors of your company, which is kind of the team, right? Like who is behind this, who's pushing this, who's bringing this together. And we like to ask a lot of our guests like what their favorite book is. And a lot of them, and ours as well, is one by Peter Thiel, which is 0 to 1. And he describes kind of the effect of the founding team and how that kind of determines how successful you can be. So can you talk to kind of your process in building out your team, and before we got on the call we talked about your hiring and things like that, but can you talk about how you built out your founding team and kind of what discussions that you have to kind of figure out if they're the right fit and to figure out how you can convince them to be on board and things like that?
A lot of people, particularly people in my position more than anything, like white males, and just like people that have success building a company, don't reference luck nearly enough. Like we're very, very lucky that at the early phase, we had really, really good people that came on the journey. And I'll share like how I got them. And the other thing too is like, if you think about a startup, and I was talking to, it's crazy now, like where this has gone. But the other day I was talking to a couple of senior executives who were part of a panel that were like, one of my investors has a panel of experts and we pitched our business, and they were asking a bunch of questions, and they were talking about like the fridges that we provide the grocer. And they're like, listen, you could probably do a better model and design something different. And after the feedback, I stopped this executive who was like, he was literally a co-founder of Whole Foods. That's who I was talking to.
Wow.
And he gave me the advice on the fridge. And I stopped him and I was like, listen, like we haven't raised that much money. Like to date, we've raised $4 million. We're now at like 60 people. We've been at this for 5 years. And to even raise any of the money, it was almost impossible as it is for a lot of people. I'm like, we're using whatever fridges the grocer's buying us. Like we're just sending magnets and decals. Like we can't even think about like going to buy stuff ourselves. So it's just, we're still at that phase in a lot of ways of like the 0 to 1 mentality, because that's been bred in our business. But how the initial team came to be, it was myself. So I'm the sole founder, but people joined really early. My CFO, who was a friend of mine that I played hockey with growing up.
Okay.
He was basically in between jobs and he was looking for his next thing. He was an investment banker and he left that. He's like, I don't want to do that anymore.
A lot of people
don't. An article that was posted about Flashfood early on, and we went for a beer, and I was like, hey man, like you want to join? Like I can't pay you. Like it's not even really a job. But like, yeah, do you want to come on this journey? And he's like, yeah, sure. Okay. And then my COO, who was my former boss as a management consultant, I took him out for dinner and like convinced him to join. And he was a little bit more like, all right, like you need to do, like, I'm not just going to leave my job, like my career for this, like where are you going to be, what's going to happen. So it took him like probably like 6 or 8 months to come on. And then my CTO, originally our first version of the app, we got built from a developer, and I got introduced to our CTO, whose name is Chris, and he was doing tech consulting work. He had sold a digital agency with a couple friends, so he was taking a sabbatical because he was just overrun. So he was doing consulting work, and I got introduced to him, and I asked him to do an audit on our first version of the app, because like 0 to 1, how do you build the MVP? I basically like went to Upwork, which is a website where you can hire people internationally, and I had the first version designed in from a designer in Serbia, and then I had the first version of the app built by a developer in China named Nazima. And why that's important is because Nazima and I would only talk through Skype, and it wouldn't be a video call. It wouldn't be a voice call. It was only texting, like only typing on Skype.
Okay.
And the picture of Nazima was a woman. Okay. And that's an important detail. So I asked Chris to come in, and we paid him as a consultant to do an audit on the tech before our first store pilot. And originally he was like horrified. And then when he dug in, he's like, you know what? Like, this app kind of sucks, but I think it can work for the one store that you're trying to do. So we ended up like executing on that. And why I talked about Nazima is now if you reverse, like now knowing after Chris did the audit, if you reverse Google Nazima's image, it was actually a famous Chinese actress. So I have no idea who built the first version of our app. I have no idea who they were in the world. They could have been anywhere. It could have been anyone. And like obviously since then that version got put to bed and we hired a proper agency. But Chris, who I was trying to convince to be our CTO, we still like had like nothing. I think we had we had our first check in the door. So our first round of funding, we raised $450K. We had 60,000 of that in the bank. No idea how much more we were going to raise. And what I did was I was trying to convince Chris to join the team. And he's like, I don't know. I'm taking a sabbatical. Like I told myself I'd give myself until Christmas, and it was September.
Right.
So I ended up finding this like pretty cool 2-story loft in Liberty Village, which is like a trendy neighborhood in Toronto. And I signed a 3-year lease. It was $5,000 a month in rent. And my CFO and I went on Kijiji and Facebook Marketplace, and we rented a U-Haul, and we bought a whole bunch of used furniture, stuffed it into this place, made it look pretty cool. And I was like, Chris, why don't you like come by the office and check it out at least? Like come work there for a day on the other stuff. He's like, yeah, okay, I'll come check it out. And he came in and he's like, you know what? Like you guys actually have something here. Like, fine, I'll join. I'm sure. And that's how we got the first 4. Like it was myself and those 3 as the first 4 people that have stayed together even now.
Yeah. How'd your CFO feel about that $5,000 a month?
Yeah, we didn't have the relationship at the time where I was like running a lot of stuff by him, which probably would he would have had a heart attack. He'll like even now he'll still have a heart attack if I spend $5,000 without him knowing. So I can only imagine back then if he would have known that I spent the 5 Gs, it wouldn't have went over very well. Like he probably would have just left and got a real job because why would he stay?
It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, as a finance manager myself, I would be like run rate. You know, so it's just like
yeah. It's like, cool, we got an office that we're not going to be able to afford, and this is the end, right?
Yeah. No, that's incredible. I love that. And we do have we have a small percentage of some international listeners. So maybe if Nazanin, if I'm saying that right, is listening.
Nazima, I think it's Nazima, but maybe not. Yeah.
If you're listening from somewhere, we want an identity reveal here. But
I also, funny enough, on that, I saved all the transcripts from like those conversations, and like Nazima couldn't even speak English. Like it was just typing. Wow. It was so broken. It's hilarious.
I'm convinced this is like a bot or something, or some AI tech that just, you were talking to a robot and now it's been disconnected. But
Yep.
Yeah, no, that's funny. I think, something that you just said there, like how your CFO even now today wouldn't allow that $5,000 rent. Can you speak to how your relationships have developed with your founders and your team, and kind of how you manage that between yourselves in terms of, building the trust, but also being able to have those conversations of, you need to have tough conversations every now and then. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's really, really difficult to be a founder CEO and remain on as a CEO as we go through the levels of growth that we're at now. So like our team's gone from 0 4 years ago or 5 years ago to now 60 people and growing. And for me as the CEO, I've had to evolve, like almost like an athlete who's getting older in their career. Like the Kobe at 35 was not the Kobe at 21. And same with LeBron, right? Like that would be even more useful. And as a CEO, the way to do that with your team, your direct team, and then also like compounding that across your whole company, is you just have to let other people make decisions. Like you either do or you don't. And if you don't, then people are going to leave, good people, and they're not going to develop to their ceiling, and you're just going to lose them. If they do, and if they do have autonomy and they're able to make decisions, then they keep growing with you. And you also have to challenge them. Like there was one of my executives, we had a board meeting, and after the board meeting, so for those who aren't, who don't have a board yet, or not that far, or not at that point, um, in properly run board meetings, at one point, the CEO leaves the call or the meeting and then comes back in like 15 or 30 minutes. And the board members just tell you what you're doing right or you're doing wrong. And you just have to like take the feedback, which is like kind of funny. And my wife still laughs about it because like we'll have a board meeting now on Zoom and I'll like be in her office for like 15 minutes and she'll be like, can you just leave me alone and like tell me after what they say you suck at? But one of the pieces of feedback that came from one of those meetings, maybe like 2 years ago now, was the board's like, this executive, like, we don't know if this person's going to be the right person to scale with the company. And we don't know if they're going to be able to develop. And these are the deficiencies that we're seeing. So we just want to like put that in your mind now. And that's kind of, as a CEO, it's like, how do you take that? How do you think through that? And it took me about a day, but I reached out to this person, this executive, and like shared with them what the feedback was. And they're like, is this like the start of you letting me go? I'm like, no, it's the complete opposite of that. Like, I'm telling you so that like we could solve this and get better. And part of the feedback that came from the board was on me because I wasn't allowing this person to do their job and like to present and like to communicate. I was kind of like muzzling them. So, in a roundabout way. So just learning, handing things off, giving autonomy, and that all fosters back to trust. And the tricky part, so with that early team and developing that team, that was one thing, and we went through as a journey together. And now it's a whole other thing where like now we've got a leadership team of 7 people and we've got a management team below them, and it's like, how do you consistently usher that amongst the whole company? And there's something called commander's intent that one of my executives brought up to me recently, and it's like an army thing or a Navy military thing that is used in the US, and a lot of companies do it. And it's basically like you want to tell someone what you want the result to be, and you want to let them figure out how to get there regardless of like what you would do, and then like they can lean on you as a leader for any questions throughout that process. But that's how you get more out of people. And so that's how I think about it. That's how I think about developing, and that's what I think has really helped me. And the last thing that I'll say on that is we're fortunate that we have people on our board who have been really, really successful starting and selling companies, also a successful executive and a really, really helpful person from a top class VC fund. And a lot of before starting a business and before working, I was a hockey player at a pretty high level. And as an athlete, you have to get feedback. Like you're going to get it from your coaches based on your playing time, and you're going to get it from your teammates. So using that feedback and improving is just, you need to do it, because if you stop doing that, then like you're going to be a shitty executive, a shitty CEO, and you won't get good talent and won't build a big business.
Yeah, for sure. Would you say that's probably one of like the key techniques that you use for self-improvement, just feedback, whether that's personal or with your company?
Yeah, absolutely. And now it's the trickiest part of receiving feedback now is trying to understand the person who's giving it to you and what their situation is like, particularly like with what's happened with COVID, right? So funny enough, like we've got someone who's considering leaving the company and has kind of let us know that they're going to leave the company, and they're going to take the weekend to think about it. But I'm talking to this guy, I'm talking to this person.
Yeah.
Trying to be cognizant of like not like zeroing out people. I'm talking to this person at 3:00 today. So or at 3:30. So we're recording, it's 2:42. And part of the feedback that the person shared was over the last year, like it's been really difficult to provide feedback to the company and to have anything done. Like we're basically working at an excruciating slow pace, and like it's just not for me anymore. And from my end as the CEO, it's like, we just lived through COVID. Like we're still not out. It's still a pandemic. Everybody's having all kinds of different difficulty. Nobody knew how any business was going to react. We certainly were affected, didn't know how the business was going to react. Like shit was very difficult. And then even for me as a CEO, I lean on mentors and like other people. And when I'm asking them for advice, they're like, we don't know. Like, we haven't been through this. Like, we're not leaving anywhere with our families. Like, everybody was in the same position, right? So, part of what I'm going to share with this person is like, we were way conservative and didn't want to let people go and had to have like cuts and like just couldn't. We really just had to keep the business afloat for a while there. And there was some scar tissue and baggage from that. But I also have to think about it from this person's perspective and how they're thinking about their work life and how they're thinking about anything that they went through the last year. So hearing feedback has been a huge thing for me. Listening has been a huge thing and like is something that I'm constantly doing. And then also understanding where the feedback's coming from and how that person's thinking about things, which is now the phase that we're at, arguably more important than even what the feedback is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think as a leader, I think the best skills you can have are communication and listening. Because at this point in time, like you mentioned, decisions should be made by, lower managers and stuff like that. Because you can't manage the entire ship anymore. It's too big. And then I guess sometimes like I feel like CEOs should also, they're almost like the mission kind of people. They kind of drive the ship and make sure everyone has the same vision or goal. So like your point, like the key result. I think we'll get to this topic in a little bit, but I think that's so important to have a clear vision of where the company's going. And I think that's why people stay, because they know exactly where we're headed, exactly why we're kind of on this mission. That's powerful.
Yeah, you bang on it. That's basically my role now. It's like communicate clearly what we're building and keep people rowing in the same direction. And
Right.
that's its own, like, I'm not good at that. I'm probably like, that's like one of the worst things that I could do. Like, I don't really celebrate things that often, even myself, like celebrating wins. Like, I don't know, a running time. Like, if I get like a PB running, a personal best running, it's like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to celebrate that. I'll annoy my wife about it and like maybe order a pizza. But like, like, I'm not the type of person who will celebrate milestones. And now in my role, I better get damn good at it soon
Yeah.
so that people understand when we're hitting some of these massive milestones. And that's one of the things that I'm challenging myself on and trying to get better at. But you're bang on. You hit the nail on the head. Like, as you grow through this journey, that's what the role becomes.
Right. That's so awesome. And so like let's actually go into like the company growth now. So, from your experience, like, can you give advice to like say companies and how they should prepare for, say, as they go through like different series, say like seed to series A, what transformation should they kind of be focusing on? And like what helped you to get to those different stages? Was it like automation, more defined sales processes, or like product enhancements, stuff like that?
So the round of funding that people associate with it, like, it's generally how you just described it, right? Like, you associate a round of funding with a certain level of growth,
Yeah.
and that is like right now probably more true than would have traditionally been. But look, the reality is, like, if you're building a tech company now, even versus 10 years ago, things are so much cheaper that like
Right.
you shouldn't need as much money as some companies have raised to get to these different things. So in my opinion, like, it's less about uh, and I'm not trying to be critical on this. Like, it's less about like tying it into like a funding round, but that's often how it's described. So what I'll say is,
Mm-hmm.
like, one, don't be seduced by like raising capital, because
Yeah.
ultimately you're just like giving up parts of your company. And then the other thing that it does when you raise money is you get an investor who comes in, usually takes a board seat and like may have a different perspective than you, and look at the things that we talked about early on in the call, right? Like food insecurity in different neighborhoods and like food, like the stuff that we're solving is really important. And even with my own investors, like, we come back to that pretty frequently, so we're all aligned on it. um, the things that really affected us through different phases of growth, you need to see, honestly, the thing that matters the most is, regardless of what kind of business you're building, is, are people using it? So for us, we're a
Right.
consumer app. Like, we've got like, it's very clear, shoppers download the one, do grocers sign up, and now that's becoming easier. Two, do consumers, like shoppers, download the app, look at the app, use the app, do they use it again? Like, repeatability is basically like the biggest thing around a startup.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's also the way that like you could trick yourself into continuing to spend way too much time and money on something that's not going to
Mm-hmm.
work. And you see companies getting propped up literally for decades with billions of dollars. Like, in
Yeah.
my opinion, it's still not proven if WeWork works. Like,
Yeah.
can it stand on its own legs? Like, it can't right now. The pandemic didn't help, but even before then, like, it can't. So how I think about growth and different levels and just innovation within a company and how you get to different thresholds. And we would be like in terms of metrics, probably now like what investors would look at for a late Series A or an early to mid Series B with our trajectory in the next like month or so. So that's kind of like where we would land on the spectrum of like companies that are raising capital. And from the growth that we've had, putting good people into the right seats, that's like so cliche. Basically, getting people the hell off of the ship that are not good people. Like that is the most important thing. Like we had a
Yeah.
guy who was in one of the areas of our business that would speak differently to me than he would to a co-op. So we had a co-op, and it was funny. And in our second office, that was also in Liberty Village. So we're now in our third office, still in Liberty Village, but in our second office, it was like
Right.
an old apartment building with 3 stories, and in the top story we took the whole floor, and it was 6 different units.
Okay.
So we basically have like 6 different rooms, and I walked into one of the rooms, and it was actually, there was an engineer there who was transitioning out of our business. It didn't work out, but they were a really good person. I really liked them, and it was a really respectful process. And they were sitting on the couch outside of one of like the boardrooms in that room, and they're like, so and so is yelling at so and so. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, like they're screaming at them. So this person who was yelling would treat executives in the company and like people more senior than them way differently than they would treat other people. And it became like pretty obvious, like really quickly and in a really disrespectful, unhealthy manner.
Yeah.
So my take on like growing a company is you want to get people that can do the job, but you also just want to get people that are good people. And the compounding effects of that are more important than, to me, any feature you're going to produce, as long as the app doesn't break or the tech doesn't break. And like, really, if you have people that are using what you're doing, and you also have people that like working with each other that are not bad people, and you provide autonomy and opportunity, like you're gonna, like, that is more important than how you run a sales cycle. Like all those things can be learned. That's all like the easy stuff. Like you can literally bring in a sales manager, you could bring in a better product manager. You like, the hard skills of like building are not as difficult nearly as like fostering the things that I just discussed, because they're really, really tricky, and the negative impact of them can be massive.
Right.
The one last thing I'll say on that is we were talking today about as a company, and I'm like, look, like there's obviously always going to be things that we need to improve on, and like we're working towards doing that, but there's a lot of good things that we have here, and like one of them being that like people don't hate their coworkers, and everybody like kind of started laughing, and I'm like, we're laughing, but that's actually like a thing. Like to be at a company of this size now and not hating somebody that you work with, like I don't think that happens that often. Like a lot of my friends that I talk to, like that are at different companies, you could hear about people that they don't like in the company, and you're obviously not going to have that all the time across the whole board, but to have a group of people that really respect each other, that are open with each other, that are honest, a diverse group, that are welcoming and not hateful, like that is a massive asset to have as a business going through the phase of growth.
Yeah, 100%. Office drama is gonna follow you everywhere, so I'm glad that that's something that's top of mind and something that you're addressing. But yeah, that's amazing, Josh. That kind of wraps up like the content portion in terms of what we wanted to understand about the business and what you're doing. One like fun thing that we like to do with all of our guests is just do a lightning round where we toss some quick questions at you to get some answers, just to understand you a bit deeper, or quicker if that works.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So this is something that I touched on before. Can you tell us maybe your favorite book or movie of all time?
So I'll go book, and I'm going to give 2 answers.
Okay.
One is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And
Okay.
2 is You Can't Make This Shit Up by Kevin Hart. And you have to listen to the audiobook. It is absolutely hysterical. And his outlook on like different things that happened to him in his life, like you learn a whole bunch of lessons,
Right.
but it's also a 13-hour audiobook. And I was probably laughing for like 6 hours of it. Like it is so funny to listen to that guy read his own audiobook, and also like him admit it's the first book he's ever reading. Like it's so funny.
Oh, wow.
That's like a must listen to.
He's a great storyteller. That's something I'm going to have to look into for sure.
Yeah, it's hysterical. And it's like so good, but also just hysterical, man.
Yeah.
All right, so here's another one here. You've had a long day at work. How do you like to come home, or maybe not come home, but how do you like to unwind?
Yeah. So for me, if I don't do something that'll like physically challenge me in a day or every 2 days, like I go nuts. Like I can't sleep. Like there's so much pressure on you when you're building a business at the scale that we're building with the expectations, that I've gotten into triathlons. Like a few years ago, I was drunk with a friend and he bet me that I couldn't do one. So I did a half Ironman. It was horrible. I was like, everything hurt. I basically walked. I swim like a baked potato. Like it was not like it was horrible. But like what that got me into now, like I'll ride the bike often or I'll go for a run pretty frequently, or like obviously with COVID, we have kettlebells at home. But I like will intentionally push myself physically, and that's where a lot of my best thinking comes from.
If you were to pick one person to have dinner with, who would that be? They can be dead or alive from any time.
Yeah, it would probably be Obama. And like Jesus as a close second, just to see if like he could actually do some of the stuff that you read about. But like that wouldn't be why I take my pick. It would probably be Obama. The amount of barriers that he broke and like the type of leader that he is and just the swag and like the confidence and the way he communicates, like I would really, that would be the person that'd be at the top of my list. I probably wouldn't even say a word. I would just ask, like, I wouldn't talk. I would just keep asking him questions and just listen to everything he says.
Yeah. And all right, so one last question here. This is probably the one that we get the most mixed responses on. Do you like pineapple on your pizza?
I'll have it.
That's a
but
no.
I won't be the guy saying, "Hey, let's put pineapple on the pizza." I'll be very clear about that. That's not me.
Okay.
But if it's there, I'll be like, "Yeah, I'll have one slice of pineapple."
Okay. I can agree with that. We're cool. We're split on that. I say yes to it, but like I wouldn't order it myself. But I don't mind it. I think it's a good compliment.
Yeah. Right. So if I'm going to like hang out with buddies and we're watching a sporting event and this is how I'll answer it. And they're like, yeah, we're going to order 2 or 3 pizzas. We'll just get 2 or 3 pineapple pizzas. I'll be like, all right, I'm not coming. Like that's clearly like a group that I don't want to hang out with. But if I'm going with a group of people and they're like, yeah, we'll get a couple pizzas. Do you mind if we get pineapple on one? That's like, yes, I'm there.
Yeah.
Like, I'm there for that. Yeah. That's how I'll answer that.
Awesome.
Variety is the spice of life, you know? So,
yeah.
Josh, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on our podcast. We think you're doing incredible work with your company, and even how you're approaching your employees within the company is the testament to kind of how you're approaching problem solving at a large scale. Can you tell us where we can find you, any last messages or anything like that for our listeners?
Yeah, download the Flashfood app on your App Store, Android store, and it's 50% off discount off groceries. We've scaled across country in Canada and are scaling pretty rapidly in America.
Awesome. Flashfoods, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thanks. That was awesome.